G'day. I try to go out of my way to play as many different games that I can. Sometimes I get stuck on particular grinds, like this year with my sim racing, grinding the Overwatch 0.5 update, as well as other multiplayer and or competitive games. At the start of each year, I usually dedicate a bit of time to playing Escape from Tarkov as well, to coincide with the wipe. But ultimately, I want to work through my ever-increasing backlog and expose myself not only to the newest and greatest games that come out each year, but also older games that I never got to experience when they were new, or games I've just been taking my sweet time to finally finish. So I figured I'd share the games I've finished this year, just in case it gives someone else the idea to either go back to older classics, or finally give a certain game a go, or a miss. I'll also link my spreadsheet in the description, where I've tried to catalogue every game I've ever played. In the finish column, Y and N are for yes and no, which is probably obvious, and O is used for games that don't really have a finish point, it's ongoing. Think something like Mario Party. On to the completed games list for 2022. There may be some slight spoilers, but no full-blown details. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Easily the best 5 out of 10 game I've ever played, and I'm mostly serious when I give it that score. Input for certain actions have a noticeable delay, progressing the story sometimes requires completely missable actions to take place, such as entering a random tower before a mission critical NPC appears. Sometimes actions do not actually carry out correctly. I've had quite a few animations just not kick in, and that's caused me to take hits and sometimes die. And the cherry on top for me was that the game requires you to sometimes talk to a character more than once just to progress the story, instead of the game just giving you all the information you need in one conversation. But when you understand the combat system it wants you to work with, when you get into its rhythm and easily fall into its tempo, fights become exhilarating, and the game takes on a shine unlike anything else From Software has done. It is an absolute masterpiece in terms of the core combat that you're constantly going to be in. Elden Ring. Originally, I would have placed Bloodborne into my top 10 games of all time list. All I wanted out of Elden Ring to take that place is some cosmic horror, and it most certainly delivered. Not to the scale that Bloodborne takes it, that is very much a Lovecraftian cosmic horror experience for the second half of the game. But what Elden Ring gives you is really great, and on top of that, the sense of wonder as you explore the world and slowly piece together the map, the secrets that are available to uncover of your own volition if you pay close enough attention, that trademark From Soft difficulty, terrific level design, all of that just gels beautifully along with another banger of a soundtrack. Props to the track for Ancestor Spirit specifically. Easily my most favourite in the whole Soulsborne series. It's a beautiful track. Unfortunately at launch, a lot of us had to deal with some technical issues, but now I won't hesitate to call this game a masterpiece. Aperture Desk Job. Meant to act as a showcase for the Steam Deck, I still gave it a go out of curiosity. Although incredibly short at only about 30 minutes, it really shows that Valve has some great talent ready to make some interesting games, even if it's a short, on-the-rails adventure with minimal input like this one. It's a shame that we haven't gotten more games from the Portal universe or in the same style as Portal, because there's a lot of interesting characters to explore, and I'm sure the writers at Valve have a ton of ideas that gamers would love to experience. Journey. It took me way too long to finally play this and finish it. Visually gorgeous, amazing soundtrack, and the story is short but full of charm and wonder. Journey is one of those rare instances where it's not just a game but an experience. The title is quite fitting for it too. As soon as you have the money and time to play this game, please do. It's only about 90 minutes long, give or take, but is simply amazing. I cannot speak more highly of this game. Splinter Cell. Probably the first modern stealth game I ever actually played. It blew me away as a kid and also frustrated the hell out of me because it played so differently than any other game I had played at the time. It was a noticeable difficulty spike for me. Coming back to it, it's still an alright experience, albeit a little janky. Levels are very, very linear, and I ran into some frustrating moments such as becoming stuck inside geometry and a couple of crashes. I couldn't tell you anything about the story, it's largely forgettable. I think it's still worth checking out if you're curious and if you already own the game or you see it on sale for super cheap. Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. The second game, Pandora Tomorrow, would have been here as well, but getting the game to run on PC was a fucking nightmare. Eventually I could play it with only a couple of crashes here and there, and that was overcome with just lots of quick saving, but then a particular crash just wiped all my saves, so Chaos Theory it is. This game absolutely holds up to today's standards. I wasn't overly engaged with the story, but the visuals, level design, and gameplay all combine into a brilliant stealth experience. If you're looking for a decent stealth game, this should be at or near the top of your list for must-plays. If you want some more details on the Splinter Cell series as a whole, I recommend the videos by Critical Nobody. He covers every game in the series quite extensively and has some other great videos that are worth checking out. Forgive Me, Father. Another addition to the ever-rising boomer shooter genre. The story does take a bit of a backseat and is only told to you through these very short bits of text that don't really explain much else about the game, and then you have a couple of bits of codex pages that you can read throughout the world. Overall, wasn't a fan of this approach, but what the game does well is its graphics and visuals. There is a lot of Lovecraftian inspired monster designs, and even the weapons take on an alien look once you start applying upgrades. Sometimes there are so many things happening on screen that it becomes a bit of a mess to look at, but I absolutely loved the 2D art style that they used for the game. The gameplay is very typical of a boomer shooter, it's very fast paced, the guns feel impactful and sound great, but pick your upgrades carefully. I don't know if it's changed since I last played, but when I did, you couldn't respec your guns, so that sort of left you open to potentially downgrading your weapon's usefulness. The Solitaire Conspiracy. Simply put, it's Solitaire with a story. There are some abilities that you're able to utilize that change the game from just being regular Solitaire, but part of the draw to this game will be the story and voice acting, which is really great. If you're a fan of Bithell games, that also might be the draw you need to try this out. The Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. A walking sim with more outcomes and endings than I can count. You might be completing a lot of tasks that seem basic or pointless, but there is a clever narrative told through the environment and the wonderful voice of the narrator, Kevin Briding, and the game usually allows you to deviate from what looks like the intended path to find new areas and endings. A strange and surreal experience, but one I recommend very highly. Deathloop. I did a video talking about my disappointment with this game, which can be found in the description of the video. I was excited, but I also know better than to expect the world from a game I knew very little about, even if it's from a dev that I really loved. I went in almost blind and left very disappointed. A semi-roguelite first-person shooter that plays very similarly to Dishonored. On release, the game was choppy as hell, and it felt like a genuine step back from Arcane's previous works. I didn't pick the game back up again until May to see if it had been fixed. Performance issues were no longer a concern, but the rest of the game was still lacking. Hand-holding, basic level design, no creative freedom for the player, and no creative ways to kill your targets dragged the game down heavily. Which was a shame because the soundtrack and 60s visual style is awesome, and the voice acting for the two leads were a huge standout. I wouldn't even really recommend this game on sale, to be honest. Post Void. A roguelite FPS with a visual style that isn't exactly easy on the eyes depending on your tolerance, but looks great regardless. It's unfortunately short and there wasn't a whole lot of content to engage with, which sucked given how good of a foundation they have with the game. It's cheap as chips though, so I would say it's worth checking out so long as you're not prone to seizures. And I am serious about that. Do not play this game if you are at all prone to seizures from flashing on screen, because this game goes fucking overboard with it. Grim Dawn. I found this to be a much more enjoyable ARPG experience than Diablo 3 for the initial campaign, but it felt super short. I was really loving the graphics and the art style and working out how to build my character, and felt like the game was finally starting to ramp up and introduce more horrific creatures to the world. Then me and my mate killed a boss. Turns out that was the final boss and we hit the credits. So if you have friends that enjoy this genre, definitely give it a go with them. Death Stranding. What a weird and wonderful journey this was. I loved the way the game relies on the empathy of others to work together and reconnect not only cities to other cities, but people to each other. It was quite beautiful in that regard. A visual treat, the environments looked incredible, and overall the game is just very, very unique. I will say though that sometimes the story felt like it was moving at quarter speed, and I don't mean it was a slow burner, but it just seemed like it literally took way longer than it needed to communicate across its ideas and themes. Sometimes it felt like characters were taking unnecessarily long pauses in the cutscenes. And then at the end of the game, you're essentially forced to endure a 30-minute cutscene, and I use that word loosely, where the game spends the whole time up its own ass before you're allowed to see the ending. It won't be for everyone, but I hope people give it a chance. Prey. I'm going to keep this even shorter and more spoiler-free than any other game in the list, because I think this game is an absolute masterpiece and one of the greatest experiences I've had in gaming. It is a masterfully crafted, immersive sim first-person shooter with some of the greatest level design in gaming. If you haven't played it, I would recommend trying the game without objective markers on your HUD. It makes for an incredibly immersive experience that won't hinder you at all due to the smartly designed areas that make it possible to navigate based on visual cues like signs, and then you've always got the in-game map if you need to rely on that. Arcane's best work so far in my eyes. Sniper Elite 5. These games haven't changed all that much over the years, but due to loving the Hitman franchise, I'm a sucker for these sandbox-style games that let you approach your objectives through multiple means. Being able to scope, pardon the pun, areas out to find the best approach is a lot of fun, and there's also co-op, which is always a super welcome addition to any game. Superliminal, a puzzle game that's all about perspective. It's short, but it's quite interesting and has a similar vibe to the Stanley Parable and Portal. If I spent more time talking about this game, I'd likely just spoil everything about it. There's not too much that you need to know going into it, other than it's a lot of fun. Sniper Elite 4. Yeah, so the whole time I had only been 3 missions away from finishing this game. It just took me nearly 4 years to come back to it after my mate had decided he didn't want to play it anymore, and I just never booted it up after that. It is good fun though if you have a friend to play with, so I highly recommend that. Spider-Man Miles Morales. I might be in the minority here, but I'm not the biggest fan of either Spider-Man game from Insomniac. The web swinging is incredible. It feels so good to actually do in the game. Both games look beautiful, but I don't find the combat to be that fun. I know it gets compared to the Arkham games a lot, but I think I preferred the Arkham games. And as a whole, the game mostly feels no different to any Ubisoft open world collectathon. Although the voice acting in Miles Morales is great, I didn't enjoy the story too much. I think 2018's story was much stronger. SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom. At release, I saw so much excitement for this game, I figured it had to just be nostalgia for people that played the original version back in the day, which I hadn't. But so much praise was heaped on the game for how faithfully it was remastered and how great of a game it was, so I figured, seeing as I got the game through one of the humble monthly bundles, I'll just give it a go. Not a fan, to be honest. It's quite boring, and I only finished it out of curiosity. I know I might come across as silly for criticizing a kid's game, but come on. Crash Bandicoot is still a fucking banger, and that's a kid's game. Graphically, SpongeBob looks really nice, but it's one of the more uninteresting platformers I've played. Call of Juarez, Gunslinger. Apparently this game had been in my library for years, but I don't even remember buying it or activating its key. Either way, I decided to give it a go because it was there, and it's a good bit of fun. It's an arcadey first-person shooter that feels great, and the story is presented in an interesting manner with the unreliable narrator approach, along with its stylized graphics. Definitely worth a playthrough. Frostpunk. I'm not usually one for management type games, but you don't go overboard in this one, nor is the city you look after that big at all. You're not trying to make this continent-spanning civilization. It's a challenging game where you're trying to maintain as much warmth as possible to keep your citizens from freezing to death in a post-apocalyptic frozen hellscape. It's about prioritizing the right items and understanding what needs to be worked on first in order to survive. It can be rough and relies a little on trial and error, but it's a lot of fun. Once you're done with the main campaign, there's plenty of other scenarios to play and even DLC that can be usually bought for fairly cheap. The Secret of Monkey Island. I think this game has so much charm to it, and I can absolutely understand why it's so fondly remembered after so many years, but I'd have to put this in the unreasonable combinations to progress category of point and click games. Sometimes the way forward makes no logical sense or doesn't seem to be very well telegraphed. Much like another brilliant point and click game I played for the first time only a couple of years ago, Grim Fandango. I'm not a fan of having to guess what the game expects me to do with a random assortment of items, but I'm still keen to play the rest in the series. Metal Hellsinger. Much like BPM Bullets Per Minute, this is a first-person shooter where you carry out your actions in time with the beat of the song. I think BPM does a better job gameplay-wise, but Hellsinger has an insanely awesome soundtrack featuring vocals from many different metal artists, and also looks a lot better. I hope there's a sequel in future because there is an amazing foundation that was laid with this game, and I would really love for them to do a sequel and find either more singers to feature in the songs or just have something like double the amount of songs that they do in this game. Warhammer Chaos Bane. Honestly, not too bad. I think Grim Dawn, Diablo 3, and Path of Exile are much better experiences in the action RPG genre, but this is okay if you've got friends to play with and get the game on a deep sale. Me and my mate had some strange bugs that caused us to restart the game a few times, and it's very much on the easy side, but otherwise it ran well, looks alright, and has some pretty cool abilities to use. For some reason, I have a hard time paying attention to the story in ARPGs, so I don't really have anything to say on that front. Scorn. My video on this game can be found in the description. One of the bigger disappointments of the year, after waiting nearly 10 years for this game to come out, it felt like it was still unfinished and more like some sort of prologue to a bigger game. The few puzzles they have aren't really that interesting, and the combat honestly sucks. It kind of drags the experience down overall. Then later, I learned through the art book of the game that a lot of content, story-related items, and even levels were cut entirely. A damn shame given that it's one of the greatest visual experiences I've ever seen. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 2022, I guess I have to call it. I've got a video talking about this game that I'll link. It's another disappointment. I really enjoyed Modern Warfare 2019, a really solid campaign to go along with a solid multiplayer, when it wasn't bugged, that is. Modern Warfare 2 almost seems like a downgrade that overstays its welcome campaign-wise by being longer but less memorable. The sniper level is a snooze fest, the second last boss fight with a tank is nearly as boring with zero payoff, and the convoy level was just comical in how badly it played and looked, with cars slowing down to a crawl for you to catch up to, just to name a couple of standouts. On top of this was some insanely poor writing that made the story so fucking ridiculous, I refused to believe real writers wrote it. Then the multiplayer came out with many of the same bugs as 2019 and some new ones I hadn't seen, like not being able to party up with more than 2 people, otherwise the game would crash. It played worse than 2019, and even the new Warzone was barely better than the first trashy version they made. Luckily, despite having about 10 hours of game time, I was able to refund the game through Steam, so worked out pretty well in the end. God of War Ragnarok. I would say there is one aspect of this game that I preferred in 2018. Otherwise, this is a massive improvement on an already incredible game. It looks gorgeous, plays great, has a lot of areas to visit and different enemies to fight, features some amazing voice acting and a brilliant soundtrack. The only downside is that the story felt a little lacking in impact. The game tries to force a couple of emotional moments that I don't think land at all. It seems some story elements from 2018 were just dropped completely, and overall the entire final act felt very, very lacking. Still an incredible game though. Doki Doki Literature Club. My sister insisted that I actually stick with this, as visual novels aren't usually my cup of tea. I won't say much else other than this is one of the coolest little rides that a game can take you on, so I definitely recommend it. It is very, very strange, and I will leave it at that. The Callisto Protocol. Yet another disappointment. I really liked Dead Space, and I absolutely loved Dead Space 2. Given the marketing of this game and who was working on it, it was hard not to anticipate something along the lines of the Dead Space series, but I still knew to temper expectations. And yet the game fell short. It ran terribly, audio mixing was an issue, the story seemed to have been shaved down. There are 2 enemies only that are used for a boss fight, one of which you have to fight 4 times within an hour. Some of the jump scares are just music stingers that don't even have enemies on screen. It's fairly easy, and to top it all off, the game just abruptly ends with no real ending. But we're getting a story DLC at a later date. Call me a pessimist, but this is sounding exactly like Dead Space 3. In terms of positives, the combat can be pretty enjoyable when you're using multiple weapons and your telekinesis to create space and push enemies either away from you or into environmental objects to kill them. The graphics look amazing. I can't understate that enough. It's seriously a visual treat, and the voice acting was really solid. Do not buy this game, even on sale. Enslaved, Odyssey to the West. I don't remember when I got this game, but I wish I had played it earlier. Whilst it's very much an easy game and we'll never see the sequel, I had a great time with it. Other than some weird visual issues that I wasn't able to fix, it looks really nice, especially the character models. For an older game, even the eyes of the characters look terrific and do a wonderful job alongside the great voice acting to bring these characters to life. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. What an unfortunate outcome we had with this game. Due to many issues during development, what we got with the final result is a super interesting, immersive sim first-person shooter / RPG, sort of along the lines of Deus Ex, for the roughly first half of the game, and then the rest of the game becomes this railroaded shit fight that could be near impossible to beat without the correct build or class, because there are just way too many enemies to fight, or the bosses you have to fight are just way too strong. Due to the class I picked and the build I had, there was no way I was going to complete the game without using cheats. I just could not. I could not survive. I didn't have the money to buy the blood to keep my health up. There was just no way it was going to happen, which sucks because there are so many things about the game that I was loving up until that point. The lore, the voice acting, the creative stories that are told, even the visuals for the time hold up fairly well. I still think it's an enjoyable game to experience, so long as you expect to be frustrated as hell And if you are going to play it, make sure you follow a guide that will lead you to the right class and the right abilities in order to actually complete the game properly. Spec Ops: The Line. I'm somewhat glad I waited to play this game because I don't think I'd have the same appreciation playing this at 18 than I did at 28. It's a wonderfully told story, still looks visually incredible, plays great, and then everything is topped off with brilliant voice acting. I really wish this game sold 10 million plus copies because I think military shooters would have gotten much higher quality stories once the market showed an interest for great, thoughtful writing. Instead, we get poorly told shitfest like Modern Warfare 2. For anyone who likes Spec Ops, I would recommend watching Apocalypse Now and also reading Heart of Darkness. Limbo, the final game I finished for the year. I've owned this on a Vita, PC, and I think I had once played it on 360 back in the day. But finally, I finished it and really enjoyed it. And of course, I added it onto another platform, my Switch. I'm sure most people know of the game by now, at least due to the memorable visuals. It's a side-scrolling puzzle and platformer. It's really great, a short experience, but worth playing, especially if you're able to get it on sale, which it is a lot of the time. There we go, 2022 down. The first big release of 2023 that I'm really hyped for is Hogwarts Legacy. I just want the game to be good and not run like shit. That is all I'm asking for, but time will tell how that turns out. Until the next video, have a good one.